Hello, happy Tuesday, the 6th of October 2020. As a disclaimer, I've checked all the copyrights out on the images produced here, but however, if there is anything that you would like me to remove, then please get in touch and I will very much do so. So let's have a look at speciation. As a starter activity, what I'd like you to think about is listing pairs or groups of animals that are similar to each other but are a different species. For example, a horse is similar to a zebra. So if you could list those for me and pause the video. As an extension, give examples of successful cross-species breeding in terms of producing offspring. Please do not confuse this with cross-breeding. Okay, for example, a cocker spaniel and a poodle to make a cockapoo. Those are the same species. They are all types of dog. Right, okay, so in terms of speciation, what we need to have a look at is being able to describe the steps that give rise to new species. You need to be able to describe the work of Darwin and Alfred Russell Wallace in the development of the theory of evolution. And finally, you should be able to explain the impact of these ideas on biology. So there's a picture at the bottom. On the left is Charles Darwin, and on the right is Alfred Russell Wallace. Now, Alfred Russell Wallace was already considering his ideas about evolution when he began to travel in 1848. And he went on an expedition to Malaysia and he wrote to Darwin with his ideas. Now, Darwin felt that Wallace should have priority in publication of the theory. However, his friends got in touch with Darwin and convinced Darwin to write a short paper on his work. Now, Alfred Russell Wallace independently produced discussions about natural selection in 1858. Darwin then set about writing a book about his theory, which he called On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, or the Preservation of Favoured Races in the Struggle for Life. Okay, what we refer to now as the Origin of Species, Darwin produced and published this document a year later. So looking at Alfred Russell Wallace, he independently provided the theory of evolution by natural selection, and he produced joint writings with Darwin in 1858. Wallace worked worldwide and gathered evidence for evolutionary theory. There is a picture of a frog. The frog is relevant because a lot of Alfred Russell Wallace's work was on warning coloration, also known as Aposematism. So it's the idea that predators are warned off from prey due to their colour, that, for example, that it may provide some poison or toxins or may put up a fight. So it's warning coloration out to the predators that you really don't want to mess with these. An example is the honey badger. The honey badger has inverse colouring, so it is white on the top, black on the bottom, which makes it very conspicuous, and that sends a message out to predators that it is not something to be messed with. So, in terms of defining a species, for 2 marks, a species is a group of living things that are so similar that they can breed together and produce fertile offspring. Okay, so here is an example here of something that would not produce fertile offspring. A horse and a donkey, they are different species, therefore it would produce a mule, and a mule is not fertile. Natural selection alone is not enough to create a new species, although it does trigger change. What you need to do is you need to have knowledge of how new species are formed. And it's the idea that 2 populations must become reproductively isolated from one another and then undergo a type of change. Eventually they will no longer be able to breed successfully together and they will be a new species. And let's have a look at the steps. So, step 1, we've got a population. So you've got an interbreeding population with natural genetic variation within that group. So this is because there are different versions of the same genes, when we refer to these as alleles. So for example, brown eyes and blue eyes, etc. Right, now your population for speciation to occur has got to become divided by a physical barrier. Now this could be water, mountains, desert, or just a large distance, for example. This may occur due to geological activity. So, this could be when some of the population migrates or is dispersed. I've just mentioned geological activity, so if there's a catastrophic geographical change, such as an earthquake, volcano or flood, and eventually it could be a gradual change, such as continental drift, the idea that polar bears will have originated from relatives in Ireland when Pangea was about. Okay, it's the idea that things have now separated out. Now, have a look at the diagram. One of the populace has changed. So the environments in the two places will be different. So food sources will be different, temperatures will be different, there may be different shelter, etc. Therefore, over a long period of time, the two populations will evolve differently, and this is due to the selection pressures within that group. So different features and different alleles will be favoured, and natural selection will occur. So, there will be an increase in frequency of the alleles that are deemed to be advantageous in both populations, and that is natural selection. Once you remove that barrier and you reintroduce the two populations at a later date, they are so different that they no longer can interbreed. So they cannot form a species that is, they're not able to form offspring, rather, that is able to have fertile offspring. So they are reproductively isolated over a long period of time, and now they've been reintroduced, they are two distinct species. So, things to consider. Geographical changes, so physical barriers such as water, road, mountain chains, etc. Habitat changes, so a population lives on the same mountain but at different altitudes or a different soil type. Seasonal changes, so they breed at different times of the year. There are also things to consider with behavioural changes, so change in bird song would be another obscure example of a cause of species. So, back to Darwin. Darwin has now linked his ideas of natural selection, and he's seen where speciation has occurred. So Darwin studied wildlife on the Galapagos Islands, which is a part of the country of Ecuador, and it's 1,000 kilometres of the west. It's in the Pacific Ocean. So what he noticed was the songbirds, the finches on the different islands, were similar to each other, but they showed wide variations in their size, beaks and claws from island to island. So for example, their beaks were different depending on the local food source. So therefore, because the islands were very distant from the mainland, the finches that had arrived there in the past had